Hello and welcome to the weekly talk show of the EU-ASEAN Next Gen Think Tank Dialogue. My name is Phuong-Anh from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, and this week I'll be your trusted host. So the EANGAGE Dialogue is a 2-year project proposed by the CAS-EU, DAV, and AVI to contribute to better awareness of EU foreign policy objectives and EU engagement in the ASEAN region. We also aim to reach higher interest in cooperation with the EU in the area of security, connectivity, and sustainable development. The action is designed to enable a group of young think tank researchers from ASEAN and EU to do relevant research on specific issues of the three mentioned areas between the two regions. The second objective is to facilitate exchanges and debates between influential European and ASEAN think tanks and academic institutions on EU-ASEAN collaboration. In order to promote the visibility of the project, we've launched a series of weekly 30-minute talk shows. So for the last couple of weeks, as you know of, we have had fellows from the Connectivity Cluster, Catherine Setiawan, to talk about digital trade, and fellow Nadina Iakov from Sustainable Development Cluster talk about smart and sustainable cities. Today, our Security Cluster is proud to have Kristina on the show and to share more about intermediaries in security and justice development in her recently published book. Let's get to know her better, shall we? Kristina, can you please say hi to the audience?
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so Dr. Kristina Simion is a research fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs Asia program. Her research concerns Myanmar and the Southeast Asia, where she focuses on the rule of law and constitutional processes, state recognition, and global relationships formed through bilateral and multilateral development. As a trained socio-legal scholar, she is interested in parallel structures and the people that inhabit the relational state. Kristina is also a specialist on Swedish government, focusing on rule of law development assistance and Myanmar. She is a visiting fellow at the Department of Political and Social Change, ANU colleague of Asia and Pacific. She designed and delivers the course Law, Culture, and Society in Asia as part of the Stockholm University Master Program in Global Asian Studies at the Department of Political Science. And she is also the author for the recently published book by Cambridge University Press. But let's not spoil it right away, and join me to welcome our speaker. So Kristina, thank you for taking the time to be here and to share more about your interests in intermediaries and security and justice development. This seems to me like a very interdisciplinary topic to focus on. So I wonder what sparked your interest in intermediaries.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks again for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. So yeah, intermediaries. Well, actually, it was through this conversation I had many years ago. So for professional work purposes, as a rule of law practitioner, I attended a rule of law training course in the outskirts of Berlin, where I got the opportunity to chat with a local lawyer from Uzbekistan about his work challenges. And he worked on a large European Union funded justice and security project. And he told me how he often felt stuck with important information in between the project counterparts, in this case, the national government and the large foreign donor, which was the EU. And he told me with some frustration that, one part says it means this and that, and the international part says in our practice, it means this. He told me that, these were very small things, but it was so important to get them right. I hear both sides and they're very frank to me, but not to each other. So this story and talking to him about his work challenges really made me realize that these intermediaries must sit on information that could potentially help improve foreign engagements and security cooperation. So that's sort of where my interest was sparked. And then that has just followed me throughout the years.
Wow, so you're telling me that a small conversation in Berlin resulted in a book project that I suspect took many years?
Yes, indeed. This book is really the result of that conversation. And I would, of course, love to meet this person again and discuss the book. But that would be trickier. But instead of focusing on Uzbekistan, I was privileged to gain access to and carry out my PhD research in Myanmar during its most optimistic moment after elections in 2010. And unfortunately today, as the situation in the country has deteriorated quite dramatically, we might understand even better that, you know, improving security and justice in some settings, it's a very difficult undertaking, and that often well-meaning foreign-funded projects might need to rethink some of their traditional approaches, and especially, you know, listen to the people on the ground and work with intermediaries, and then ensure their safety.
Interesting. And I bet that our audience is curious about the keyword of today's topic, intermediary. So can you give us a definition of who or what is an intermediary?
Absolutely. And as you can imagine, this is a question people ask me quite a lot, and they were often looking for a predetermined answer. And I'll get back to that a bit. But if we start with this sort of general definition, I would say that the intermediary is a person or organization who's positioned in the middle space, so between international and national norms, ideas, and development objectives. So the key here is that you have some sort of foreign intervention that creates a space for the intermediary, and the other side can be a national, regional, or local. And they work as local staff, lawyers, government officials, NGO leaders, or international consultants. But what they have in common is that they perform functions that include mediation, brokerage, and translation as an effect of foreign policy engagements. They're often local individuals from the countries where they operate, but they are also bilingual and foreign educated. So they're those type of people that foreign donors and foreigners feel quite at ease with, because they can speak the same language, they have the same frames and references at times, and they also have large networks and access to various forms of both social and foreign capital.
So from where I see it, the range is quite diverse, right? We can have someone as a local staff, lawyer, government official, or even someone in the non-governmental sector to be an intermediary. But there must be so many of them.
Right. So, and this is what I wanted to come back to, because many people ask me, who are they? And, you know, are you looking at NGOs? Or are you looking at consultants? And the way I did my research was that I went into the field and I asked, you know, who has an influence, who is important in this field, who is the person or organization that foreign donors use to get their sort of projects going or implement their projects. So I would ask them, you know, who's your the key person doing this? And in that way, I could identify the people or organizations that were not just neutral go-betweens, but that did have some influence on how development was being delivered, had influence on how concepts were being translated, had influence because they had to mediate between the foreign donor and local and national counterparts. And there is a well-established theoretical field that analyzes intermediaries. We found them during colonialism, when they had to mediate between the colonial interveners and local and national counterparts, of course. And then there has been studies on development intermediaries from a large field of development studies. So I've drawn this theory and then look for intermediaries that have some effect on the way justice and security development is carried out when such work is part of this foreign-funded project.
Very, very diverse topic. But why are you so interested, particularly in security and justice?
Well, I actually, I have many years of practical experience working in the field, and as a lawyer, I am interested in how societies can sort of stay secure and people live without fear of crime or injustice. But I was never interested in traditional legal work, right. Not at all. But I was still I like legal questions too much, not to make it my field of focus. But of course, you would find intermediaries in sort of any development field. So the law and justice and security field is just sort of my frame around it. But it's also where I feel most comfortable. But also, I mean, security and justice challenges is something that has sparked so much debate throughout the decades, and it continues to this day. I mean, what does justice and safety mean to people, and how do we ensure it, and to what costs? These are questions that are up for debate at local levels, regional levels, and international levels, national levels, and they're often very hard to solve. And there are many different opinions about, whose system is the best, and what you can do to achieve the best outcomes, etc.
Yeah, so that explains why you're so interested in the field. You even got me curious. So I was wondering, how does security and justice look like when it is the focus of development cooperation?
Well, it's interesting. It's often it's based on these very well-intended ideas to foster efficient, transparent, independent, open and accountable justice systems, access to justice for all. And this type of development cooperation often seeks to strengthen justice systems that respect the rule of law, where people are treated equal under the law, and the laws of the land have good and just qualities. Focus can also be on enhancing transparency to prevent corruption, which of course undermines a national rule of law system. And then there's also sort of the other side of things, which is and which donors in the field has increasingly come to realize, and that's the importance of working also with more informal systems of justice resolution and security provisions, or parallel structures that might sort of not appear as the most obvious system when you first enter a setting, but then after some research and understanding of the local context, you might see that these systems can be the most important security and justice providers for people in some regions, as they might resonate better with local values and understandings, and therefore they might be more accessible to people on the ground, who are the end users of any reform project that seeks to improve security and justice. And that's really important to remember. But even if we're talking about sort of top-down processes and large processes, it's really the people on the ground whose sort of security and justice situation needs to be improved.
Mm-hmm. I understand. I also agree that the local context is very important, because it's not the same in every country. So I was wondering, what were some of the most pressing security and justice issues that you identified during your fieldwork?
Oh, there were many, but yeah, it was interesting also because the challenges and the way things worked were just so different from anything I've seen before. But I definitely encountered a corrupt court system that focused on administrative processes rather than justice. So courts had this strategy of just getting sort of people from coming in and then going out and just going through all this paperwork, but there was not really any questions about justice. Judges sometimes were not present during trials, which anyone who works in this field knows it is completely wrong. But even sort of lawyers would not react to that, because they said, well, it's just a process that needs to go on. It doesn't matter if the judge is in the room or not. And this could be during a witness statement or questioning, for example. There were also a lot of use of informal bribes, with brokers brokering these bribes and knowing sort of who to pay and how much and when, etc. A police force that was controlled partly by the military, and also military that was not under civilian control. There was also a tendency of ordinary people to sort of do everything they could to stay away from the formal state system, and to resolve their justice and security issues more locally, for example, by the help of ethnic or religious leaders.
Mm-hmm. So you got me curious about the practical work. So what does this mean? I mean, what do donors do on the ground in this setting to improve the security and justice situation?
Well, I think for many donors, a large part of development work in this field includes education and training, and of course, in the law and justice field, a lot of focus has also been on legislation and legal reform, etc. But in practice, I would say training police officers, judges, lawyers. For example, topics could include judicial integrity, lawyers' conduct, or on questions on how to act more responsibly in accordance with human rights. It can also mean ensuring better prison conditions and improving case filing systems in courts. Court monitoring is a very common tool where you have sort of observers going into court processes and monitor what's going on, and then they can provide recommendations on how to improve the court system. Another thing that donors often work with is trying to set up some form of legal aid system, sometimes a fully sort of national legal aid system, but it can also be about setting up more local initiatives to provide legal aid, because that's not always something that people in some countries can have access to quite easily. There might also be some advocating for legal of repressive legislation or support to such work when possible. So even when it's not possible to actually reform the legislation, there might be advocacy work around that for a couple of years before reforms can start. And that's when you come to the drafting stage and really looking at other often international examples of how a piece of legislation can sort of reflect rule of law principles better than what is the case at the moment. And for security, a key issue is to ensure civilian oversight over the security forces. So there might also be advocacy and legal reform work around such questions. And then I think I mentioned that donors may also work with these parallel structures for conflict resolution as a means to help improve people's access to justice.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this sounds like it's a really complicated process. Is it like this in the reality? Is it really this complex?
I mean, indeed. I mean, these are political and context specific and timely processes, and they take a lot of time and a lot of trust building. So of course, an issue then is that you have people coming and going from these settings, while it might be important to stay on for quite some time to establish trust with local and national counterparts.
Right.
Really this blend of these top-down, really complex approaches with bottom-up initiatives from the local level. But what's often forgotten in these different sort of sections of work thematics is, the middle ground or the middle space, and that's where we find intermediaries. Mm-hmm. So by listening to their challenges and obstacles, we gain better insights to how we can improve justice and security development programs to better match both donors' objectives and then on the other hand, regional and local realities.
Mm-hmm. So I can see how, given the depth of the topic, I can see how and why there should be a profound research on this. So that's explaining why you just published a book on the matter. Let's focus a little bit more on your book again, which was just published this June, if I remember correctly. So what is called?
Well, not so surprisingly, maybe. It's called Rule of Law, Intermediaries, Brokering Influence in Myanmar. So it was published, I think in June this year by Cambridge University Press, which I can highly recommend, by the way, if anyone is interested in seeking to publish their work. They have a very large, devoted sort of professional staff. And also, as you can see in the title, Myanmar comes at the end of the title, which sort of reflects the focus on intermediaries primarily. And also it shows that the findings, from a case study carried out in Southeast Asia can be generalizable to other settings. And that, I think that's a key point to remember also when seeking to publish your book, that even if we're drawing on these cases from regions that we really enjoy working in, it's important to show how we can build theory from those examples.
Yes, I agree that when researching a case study is very, very important for us to reflect what we've worked on and to draw a conclusion from that. And I'd like to remind our audience that if you have any questions so far, please leave it in the comment box and then we'll come back to it later. Okay, so let's share a little bit more about the content of your book, shall we?
Sure. So I don't know if I mentioned it already, but my book explores the intermediaries, of course, but I worked for various foreign funded programs that sought to improve security, justice, and rule of law in Myanmar after this political opening. So various international organizations and donors would arrive in Myanmar and sort of start and try to establish their activities working in this field. So by interviewing intermediaries in depth, my research showed many things, but I'll give some examples. For example, but I think the main sort of findings that are important to me are the ones where I'm able to show how foreign donors and local and national counterparts often have different goals, understandings, and expectations in regards to these programs. And there again, of course, time is an important factor, because if we need to implement these projects really quickly, we might miss careful assessments and long-term relationship building. But just to give you some examples that intermediaries experience that's very challenging. So it's really their insights I'm drawing these findings on. But I saw that foreign donors would focus on procurement processes, contracts, and evaluation, while local and national counterparts would value trust building and long-term personal engagements. And these established relationships could be damaged when donors came back with their need for evaluations and etc. I also saw how foreign donors sometimes used concepts and terminology that didn't easily translate. For example, terminologies like rule of law or justice, not saying that these concepts don't exist on the ground, but they might have been translated differently, understood differently. You could have explained them differently. And it was then up to the intermediary to sort of come up with new words or list words to try to explain these concepts that were quite difficult to grasp. Another thing my research showed was that foreign donors sometimes work with people out of convenience because they can speak English very well and they're interacting very good, perhaps rather than those with local and national buy-in. And this can of course lead to resentment by those overlooked, for example, because they don't possess English proficiency. And this also raises question of sort of seniority and who in society you address and when, etc. So yeah, really, I mean, I unlocked the intermediary perspective, and there's much more in my book, of course. But I really hope that the insights can help improve development programming.
Yes, so hearing all the content of your book, I reckon that there must be some practical field trip that you have taken. This cannot be plain just paper and book, right? So I think that you must have had an interesting time doing your field work. Can you tell me more about it?
Well, yeah, and you're absolutely correct. It's not sort of paper in book, and of course that was challenging. As a lawyer, my background is paper and books, so sort of doctrinal law. And then luckily during my PhD program, I was trained in qualitative methodology and socio-legal methods, etc. And then, you know, the program also involved doing extensive fieldwork. And right as I was initiating this research almost 10 years ago, well, eight years ago. But it was just then when Myanmar was sort of opening up to the world, and I was a member of this Google group, and I could see announcements that some of the main international donors in the field were moving into Myanmar and opening up offices in the country. So for me, it was a good opportunity to observe, you know, a moment of transition, a transitional setting where foreign donors want to come in and provide sort of what they have and provide their services in terms of security, justice, rule of law, etc. Well, anyway, so I did end up spending about a year in Myanmar during 2014, which was the year before elections, so people were very optimistic, and I got to know a lot of people in the field, and I built relationships with intermediaries. I traveled around the country with them when they were delivering training courses on rule of law and justice, etc. And it took me a long time, or a large part of my research was spent on sort of gaining trust, especially as a foreigner and outsider. But also because it was such a new sort of interesting time for everyone. I also think I had some benefits of being from the outside. You know, I really enjoyed working in the region, and of course at this stage, all of us who's working, especially with this country, are very sad about what's going on. But on the other hand, I mean, that's why I'm so happy to be part of this network, so the EANGAGE network. You know, because it brings together scholars from my part of the world and a part of the world that I'm, you know, highly devoted to. In a way, you know, that's also this bridging function. So for me, you know, I've been very lucky to have the network. And well, actually, I don't know if I told you, but my latest project is actually working with one of the brilliant Southeast Asia researchers from the network, and we're analyzing EU security support to the region.
Wonderful. Thank you for trusting the project. I'm glad to hear that you see it as a bridge that, you know, sort of connect the two regions and boost the cooperation between the European and ASEAN region. So thank you for sharing about your book and your hardworking process of researching and writing. I'm frankly amazed by the amount of effort that you have put into the book, you know, despite the certain obstacles that you have mentioned, like the language barrier and such. And it is wonderful to see that your work has been successfully published and welcomed among the academic forum. Okay. So seeing that, unfortunately, we have reached the end of the show. It is my honor to recapitulate what have been covered so far. So thanks to our lovely speaker, we have gained a more profound understanding of what an intermediary is and their effect on the way justice and security development is carried out. We've also learned that some practical knowledge of how donors work to improve the security and justice situation, and how it can be a very complex process. And I'm sure that the audience will find out more about it once they've read your book on the rule of law intermediaries. And I mean, I would. So thank you, Kristina, sincerely, for being here today and for sharing your knowledge. And to our viewers, please tune in next week for our next much exciting talk show on Friday. Until then, thank you and goodbye. Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.